Stanford University.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I think you've probably seen me. I've been to a couple of these kind of in the back. So I'm going to talk about, I guess, a couple of different topics. I was trying to think back when I was an undergraduate, and I didn't know very much. I'm sure you guys know a lot, but I felt like at the time, in retrospect, that there was kind of a lot of learning. And one of the things that I kind of hope to bring is some sort of practical, kind of trade experience, right? So I've been in the PC industry for a while, and we're going to talk about things like strategy and marketing, probably words you've heard. I don't know how much you have actually studied any of that in courseware. It's a lot of what people go to business school to learn. And so we wanted to spend one section basically just on these topics because obviously mobile apps are a really hot topic, and I think there's a lot of value, I think, from those areas. So I'm going to tell you some stories, basically, from a strategy standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, and then I'm going to tell you specifically how I think they apply to the mobile world and sort of what's going on today. And then at the end, we're going to spend some time, I think, summarizing some research that we did in conjunction with the Stanford Consulting Group. So, and then we'll do Q&A. So it should be hopefully fun. All right. So when you think about strategy, I don't know what you guys think about in terms of what that means. But one really easy way to think about it is it's sort of playing to win, right? And so there's lots of great ideas in the world, and you guys are here working on mobile apps, and it's like you probably have a great idea for a mobile application, and you think, and there's a lot of enthusiasm behind that. So you're thinking about a product, and you want to bring this product to market, and there's a lot of excitement for that. But then you start thinking about it, and you think, well, if I'm going to make this app successful, I want lots of people to use it. I want to become famous and rich. You think, well, what does that mean, right? So what does winning mean? And strategies are really about helping you win. But then you have to also kind of come to terms with what is winning. Is winning about, is it about market share? Is it about how much money you make? Is it just about fame or world peace? One of the big things I think in business is that you'll learn is that objectives need to be really measurable. So if you think about like a video game, right, you get a high score, and winning is about the person with the highest score. And so same thing in business, right? If you have an objective, you measure that winning by, you want to measure that in the most kind of specific way possible. So any objective that you have, and as you think about, if I'm going to put an app in a store or a catalog, you should think about really measurable objectives. So that's kind of one aspect of strategy, is helping you win. And then I think the more kind of important aspect of strategy is really sort of understanding what are the dynamics of the game that you're playing. You can think about anything that you do in life or in business as a game. I don't mean to trivialize that, but there really are sort of game dynamics throughout the world and throughout life. And strategy is really kind of helping you understand what are those dynamics. If you think about it as a game, I think it helps you think about what you need to do. And so you need to understand what are the rules of the game. So like in the mobile app space, there are rules, and these rules are not unlike other sort of systems or game systems. I think, and there's actually, obviously academic disciplines that study this, but at a high level and at a surface level, I think you can kind of draw some conclusions about every market has a set of rules and players and games and dynamics, and it's important to understand those. So when you think about strategy, you got to think, well, what game am I playing? What are my objectives? What's winning? What game am I playing? What are the rules of this game I'm playing? What are the dynamics of this game? So if you think about like a football game, a football game is played very differently in the snow than it is in sunny weather, right? So the dynamics of snowy weather obviously have a big impact about how people play the game. Then of course you have other people that are playing this game with you, right? So you have lots of, in the world there, the Apple store, there are more than 200,000 apps out there. And so you got to think, well, geez, I have my app. How do I make that successful? And who else is playing this game, and what are they doing? And should I be paying attention to that? And if they're doing this, should I be doing this, right? And if so, why? And if not, why not, right? So I think strategy in business is kind of a little bit of a dangerous word. I mean, it encompasses all those things. And I want you to kind of go into this thinking, or keeping your eyes kind of wide open. Right? Strategy is something that a lot of people talk about. It's kind of a dangerous word. I think business people kind of love to give strategy advice. You'll see, when you get a little older, you'll see there's lots of strategy consultants and marketing consultants, and they use big words, and they make it sound complicated. But most games and most systems are actually pretty simple. And so it's important to kind of decompose that and think about it systematically. And I think I'm hoping to just kind of expose you to some of those ideas today. And obviously it's a deeper topic, so we're going to cruise through a very big topic. But when people talk about this, I just want you to be skeptical. Okay. In particular, like I mean, business is not as I think a well-studied sort of academic discipline as maybe the natural sciences, and so you get a lot of business books from like famous CEOs. Hey, well, I was the famous CEO and I did this and this is what I did to become successful. And it's really important to understand, just because this person did those things, that doesn't mean that everyone should do those things, right? So just because someone did some strategy in some market doesn't mean you should. Specifically, a lot of strategies that are popular are things that maybe you shouldn't do, and I'll talk about why that is. And then the most obvious reason why that is that if everyone follows the same advice, not everyone can win the game, right? So in life and in business, there are only a handful of winners, and so the advice that you follow becomes very important. And in particular, copying your competitors. If you see, hey, this person over here has a neat application, they're doing some cool stuff. If I copy them, is that good or bad? And so you should think about that as you develop products and as you think about how to market and bring products and ideas to life. So, and in particular, copying competitors is usually the wrong thing to do. So I'm going to talk about a couple different stories from the past. So everyone here uses instant messaging, obviously, yes? I don't know if you remember Excite. You guys remember Excite? It was started by some Stanford students, like 5 Stanford students a while ago. It was an early portal. There's a guy, Joe Kraus. He's now at Google. He's actually a partner at Google Ventures. And he had a blog before his company got bought by Google, and that's the address of the blog. And he told this story about one of his blog entries was flossing in startups. And so he basically went to the dentist and had this conversation with his hygienist, and he was kind of recounting the early days of Excite and what was happening in instant messaging space. So instant messaging got started back in 1996. AOL introduced a feature called Buddy List as part of America Online. Did you guys ever use America Online? Yeah. Back in the late 90s, IM was a really big deal. And so you had these new internet portals like Excite and Yahoo and Lycos and a whole bunch of companies, and they all came out with these IM services. And Excite was really a strong number 2 player in the portal business, and they had their IM product was called Excite Pal. That was the first version. So it wasn't even called, they didn't even call it instant messaging. And Joe basically tells a story about how, on the blog, how they kind of explosively grew their way to relevance in the IM market. So basically the story was that they had set some objectives internally. It's like, hey, they had this IM product, and they basically set some measurable objectives, and the goal was to grow like 2 or 3 times over a certain period of time, and they kept on blowing through those numbers. And so like, they're thinking, this is fantastic. We have this product, and we get more and more users every day, and at the time, they felt like, this is going really, really well. But what was happening was everyone was growing really, really fast. And so there was Yahoo and there was AOL, and Excite, while they were growing very, very quickly and doubling and tripling in size, they were growing much slower than the rest of the market. And so internally, they saw these numbers and they got all these users and they were really happy about it. But at the end of the day, it became irrelevant because what they really needed to be looking at and measuring was market share. Like what percentage of the market did they own? And in the early days of any market, it's kind of difficult to understand how big the market is. So back then, you couldn't really criticize necessarily because they couldn't buy some report from ComScore and say, well, how big is the IM market? Maybe they could, but that kind of stuff is really hard to measure when things are going really, really fast. And so they were in this mode where they felt like, hey, we set these objectives, we're blowing through these objectives, but in fact, it turned out to be a complete losing, they weren't doing the right things at all. They weren't growing fast enough. So the lesson that he says, well, you want to set goals that can be really measured in sort of a meaningful way, in a way that kind of matters. And meaningful really depends on the dynamics of the game. So in the case of IM, what was going on at the time was that there was this land grab. It was a brand new market. IM was a relatively new technology. There weren't a lot of users of it yet, and lots of people were trying it for the first time. And the dynamics of the instant messaging space were such that there are these things called network effects. So we're going to talk about that. So IM is like a lot of technologies, basically. The more people who use the particular technology, whether it's the phone system or instant messaging, the more valuable that network becomes, right? So if you can imagine a system, and there's lots of examples of this, right? So like the phone system or the fax system. If I buy a phone, I expect to be able to call everyone else with a telephone, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Things didn't have to work out that way, right? In instant messaging, that's the way it actually didn't start that way at all. Basically, if I used Excite IM, the only IM people that I could talk to were also users of Excite. And what was happening is AOL was growing the fastest, and so the most valuable IM system was to be on AOL, because that's if your friends were there, you could talk to them, right? So there's lots of examples of products with network effects, and instant messaging is kind of a classic example of that. I mean, Facebook is a good example. Operating systems, things like Google Search have network effects. The more people that use Google Search and give the Google algorithms feedback as to what is a relevant search site, the better the algorithms get, right? So as Google becomes more popular, it becomes better and becomes better and better and better. More people use it, and it becomes very, very difficult to compete with that. So network effects are a really important dynamic in many, many businesses and markets, and IM is kind of a classic example of that. So kind of back to the instant messaging wars. So what happened was, AOL started this. They said, hey, we have this buddy list idea. And back in the late 90s, it sort of felt like IM was going to be like the next phone system, right? Mobile phones weren't that popular yet. And IM seemed like a very important application because you could tell when other people were online. It was kind of the early days of the internet. AOL got off to an early lead. They shipped kind of a standalone version of their instant messenger software a year after they launched, so you didn't have to belong to AOL to use IM. That was really important. And then in 1998, they bought ICQ. I don't know if you guys remember ICQ, but they were an international IM service that was very, very strong internationally. And suddenly, AOL had like a #1 position in instant messaging. And lots of people began to freak out. Microsoft was one of the companies that sort of freaked out. They go, oh my gosh, well, if AOL can tell when all of your friends are online, that's a bad thing for Microsoft. So they thought, well, we need to get into this market, and we need to basically have a significant presence in the market. And so they did two things. They said, we're going to ship a product, and we're going to basically hack our way into the AOL system, and we're going to provide interop. So I can run an MSN client, and I can have my customers using MSN talk to their AOL friends. And so AOL and Microsoft basically had this little war where basically Microsoft would ship a product, AOL would break the interop, Microsoft would fix it, and this went back and forth for several months. And it was kind of a desperate measure, right? Sort of like it's unusual that a public company like Microsoft is hacking into the systems of some other public company. And so you got to think, well, they're pretty desperate. So why are they so desperate? The second thing that happened in 1999 was the first open source and open IM protocol was thrown out there. And it was called XMPP. It's used today by Google and Facebook and others. But it actually started much earlier. And it was a documented open protocol. It was meant to be that anyone could build an XMPP server, and then these servers could interoperate, and then you wouldn't have the situation where you had back then where AOL controlled all your friends. So there were some desperate measures being taken by companies and organizations because they were concerned that AOL was going to dominate the market in instant messaging, right? What happened after that was basically sort of interesting. AOL basically owned the market in the US. But part two of Microsoft's strategy was to kind of bundle instant messaging with their operating system. So you bought a computer, and eventually you bought Windows XP, and what came with Windows XP was a version of MSN Messenger. So you didn't have a choice. You run XP, you basically, Messenger is installed, and it's very, very difficult not to actually sign in to MSN Messenger. And the result of this bundling was that Microsoft got market share in the rest of the world, pretty much the rest of the world, with the exception of China. So the second part of Microsoft's strategy was very effective. It's like, well, they tried to fight AOL first by kind of hacking in. The second part of their strategy was to kind of bundle, use one product to basically leverage into this new market, and that basically worked. And so what happened was Microsoft basically became dominant in instant messaging. And then later, basically in the last five years or so, there became what I call a number of sort of flanking attacks against IM. So you have things like in 2005, Yahoo and MSN. Yahoo was number 2 in the US, MSN was number 3, decided they were going to interoperate officially. You had Google launched Gtalk in 2005, and then Skype, which launched in 2002, was actually bought by eBay. And actually Google and Yahoo and others were all bidding for Skype. And when Google entered the market, it was unclear what was going to happen to Skype and if they're going to get bought by Google. And it was kind of a big deal back in 2005, what was going to happen with IM. Skype introduced video telephony. That became a really important feature. Google started bundling Gtalk and Gmail. So if you use Gmail, you're signed in automatically. And Facebook launched Chat in 2008. So you have a series of kind of things that happened in the instant messaging market. This is, you could sort of say like instant messaging is the game that these companies are playing. But the rules of this game actually changed a lot over time. So at the beginning, basically what happened was there was a land grab, right? So it was a new market. And the purpose of the AOL's objective was to get biggest fast, right? And they did that. And they basically held on to the market, and they still own the market in the US. They're still number 1 in the US. So that kind of early strategy of going fast and getting the most users was something that they basically had over the next 10 years. And so that was kind of the first phase. So the first phase of the game was get as big, as fast as possible. And that's the only objective. The second phase of this was really kind of an all-out war. So basically, AOL became number one. There were other players. Excite, at that time, had sort of dropped out. They became irrelevant. Folks like Yahoo and MSN were still in it. But basically what happened was the network effects inherent in the IM system began to take hold. So it was very difficult, even though there were other products that were available, it became very difficult for customers to switch. And so companies got really desperate. They said, hey, we're going to do these really desperate things. We're going to hack into other people's systems. We're going to bundle it with our operating system. We're going to release these open protocols so that you can try to compete against network effects. And it turns out network effects are one of the hardest things to compete against in business. And that's a really important dynamic in many business situations or many business games. So that was kind of the second phase, was you're kind of in this ground war. First, it's like land grab. Second phase is ground war. You have these companies trying everything they can to get market share, but it's very, very difficult. Third phase is kind of peace breakdown, right? Like, well, AOL has the US, Microsoft has the rest of the world. And that was kind of the way it was. And there wasn't a lot that anyone could really do about it. But of course, and a lot of companies actually at that point said, well, you know what? We have like tens of millions of users of these systems. What's important at that point? Well, at that point, the game kind of shifted. It's like, well, we have these users. It turns out it's kind of expensive to run these high-performance instant messaging networks. So we need to figure out how we can make money. And so people like Yahoo and AOL and Microsoft, they all said, well, they put ads in these systems, and they kind of like put lots of features in to get anything they could do to kind of sell stuff. So like you could have maps and you had traffic alerts, and they're trying to merchandise a lot of things in instant messaging products, and they got really kind of cluttered and sort of difficult to use. But during the sort of peacetime where people weren't really focused on market share, they really kind of focused on making money. So you could say that the market matured, and again, the dynamics of the business changed. The game changed. The point at that point was, how do we make money? I'm not concerned that my competitors are going to steal market share because I know it's going to be very difficult, so I'm going to focus on making money. And the last phase, the kind of current phase, and the phase that we're kind of still in, is sort of this flanking phase. Okay, so the market dynamics are basically settled. Network effects have kind of settled in. It's very difficult to steal market share. People have tried making money. It turns out it's pretty difficult, and so they kind of quit doing that. And then they think, well, is there some way that we can use another product to get IM market share? And so, that's what Google did. That's what Facebook did, right? So it's like, well, I have in a social network, I have a product that's similar to instant messaging, and I want to be more pervasive in my users' lives. I want to get more engagement, so I'm going to introduce an IM service, and I know just because I have this social network that I'll get lots of users. And so that becomes kind of a flanking attack against the installed base to say, hey, I'm going to steal some of your market share, and I can do that because I have kind of a parallel product, a parallel network. So they're using the social network kind of war against the IM war in that case. So that happened in email with Gtalk, social networking in chat, and also even things like video telephony, because people started realizing, typing is cool, but voice and video are even cooler, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell, sort of maybe the dynamics of the instant messaging wars, right, over time. And as you can see, the game changed, and people were doing different things at different phases, and the strategies really changed. Okay. So another example is yacht racing. So this is an example of why shouldn't I just copy my competitors, or when is it important to copy my competitors' strategies? So does anyone actually race sailboats? I don't. So I don't really know exactly how this works. But what I read was that basically in the dynamics of a yacht race, everyone is subject to the same dynamics. The wind is the same for everyone, right? So how do these boats race against each other? Well, so you have these crews, and they're like raising and lowering the sails, and they're switching sides of the boat, and they're trying to basically catch the most wind that they can so they can get ahead, right? So everyone has the same wind, and because of the skills of the crew and how efficient they are and effective they are, they start to kind of pull ahead or fall behind, right? And eventually there becomes a clear leader, and once there's a clear leader, the strategy of that leader is always to copy the actions of the number 2 player, always. And the reason is because everyone is subject to the same wind, right? So I'm ahead of everyone else, and I see this guy over here. He's going to go left, so I'm going to copy him, because if he knows something I don't, if he's taking a bet that if he goes left, he's going to catch more wind than I'm going to catch. So I'm going to make sure that is not an advantage for him. So I'm going to go left as well. So basically, the strategy of the leader is what is called fast following. So as soon as they go left, we're going left, right? And basically, I think that actually makes probably yacht racing kind of boring at some point, right? Because you follow the leader, and it's like they're just kind of like watching what the other guys are doing and trying to figure out who's number 2 and copy that. But it turns out to be the most effective strategy. In fact, it's the best strategy. It's provable that it's the best strategy for racing yachts. So in the case, if you're the leader, it turns out the best thing to do is to follow your kind of innovative number 2 players, right? Because if they kind of discover some advantage, you want to basically make sure they don't use that against you. So you're saying, hey, that looks good, I'm going to try it too, right? So, but it turns out that's a terrible strategy if you're like, number 3 or number 4. Like if you're number 2 and you're trying to catch up to number 1, you don't want to copy the leader, right? You're never going to catch them. You have to do something different than the leader is doing, right? So if you're number 1, you can do that. But if you're any position other than number 1, it doesn't make sense, right? So there are, provable strategies for winning games, and this is a very simple one, and this is a very famous one, sort of fast followers, okay? So not all strategies are available to all players. So I'm going to give you 2 slides, and this is, many years of Joe's experience kind of crystallized in two slides of common dynamics and strategies in business markets, okay? So the first thing is about early markets. It turns out it's many things are actually pretty simple. So again, like lots of business people will tell you lots of different things, but in early markets, it's the case that most early markets are a land grab. If you have the right product, you want to grow as fast as you can. It's pretty simple. And the reason is because everyone is trying to get to this number 1 position. And if you're in this leadership position, you can do things like, well, like if you're Facebook, you can say, well, I'm Facebook. I'm the biggest. I can raise more money. I have higher valuations. I can hire the brightest people. And once I do that, it's like, well, I have more money. I have better people. And I'm going to repeat, right? So leadership becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you want to be number 1. Take any action you can to be number 1. Any advantage you want to exploit. And that's basically the strategy and dynamics in early markets is the race. You can think of it as a drag race or a land grab or whatever. And there's lots of business books that kind of cover this in many different forms. So that's basically the most important dynamic in early markets. Okay, does that make sense? Pretty simple. Okay, so things become a little more complicated in more mature markets. Still, this idea of leadership is really important. If you think about businesses and like the number 1 companies in their spaces, right? They're the most important companies. Everyone pays attention to what they're doing, and it turns out they're disproportionately profitable. They're disproportionately effective in everything that they do, and it's because they're number 1. There are these leadership dynamics that are natural in competitive marketplaces, and so again, being number 1 in mature markets is also very important. If you're not number 1, and there's lots of companies that aren't not number 1, so the idea is you need to find kind of a profitable niche, and you want to sort of dominate and defend that niche. Okay, it might be the case that you want to grow. It might not be the case you want to grow. An example of this is like in the phone business. Like if you're T-Mobile or AT&T. Say you're T-Mobile. Okay, so you're number 4 in the U.S. Okay, and your strategy is a low price strategy. It's like I offer the cheapest phone plans, and I'm trying to get market share. I'm trying to get people to basically come to my network. But it might be the case that I might spend more money marketing to them to come to my network than I actually get from them. If I'm making the least amount of money, it may not be profitable for me to actually get more customers, right? So, T-Mobile, I think, specializes in terms of age demographic. They focus on a certain set of customers, maybe lower cost customers. They do some MVNO stuff. So they have these strategies to sort of say, well, we're number 4, but we have these niches that we can kind of do best in. And the question they really face is, what is the cost of growth? And so that's basically a fundamental dynamic in more mature markets. Is you have the landscape is kind of set out. You got these number 1 players. You got everyone else trying to figure out what is the kind of the niche they can occupy, and they can live there. And if they can make some money off of that and kind of attack and try to trade positions number 1, that makes sense. But it doesn't always make sense. Another example is Siemens in the mobile phones business, like in probably the early 2000s. They were the number 2 player in Europe. They don't make mobile phones anymore. But they had figured out that they were number 2, and they were actually fine with it. They're like, you know what, we're not going to go after Nokia because it's too expensive, too much hassle, and so they didn't try. And then they had people like Sony Ericsson and LG and Samsung come, and they kind of ate their lunch. But I remember I was in a meeting once with some Siemens folks, and they were like, they basically, said in not so many words, but like, yeah, we're number 2, and we're fine with that. And they're basically expressing this idea of, you know what, it's very difficult and expensive for us to grow market share, and we're okay with that. So the second thing is that the marketplace dynamics become very important. So there's basically 2 types of markets. There's sort of markets that are fair and markets that are unfair. So fair markets are tough. So if you're in in a level playing field, it's really tough because the only way that you win is you're better than everyone else, and that's actually really hard to do, right? If you think about it, like in the iPhone store, 200,000 applications, right? And like to stand above all those other applications is a very difficult thing. It's like getting into Stanford. It's like competitive, right? So it's hard. So fair markets are what I can consider sort of treadmill marketplaces, right? It's difficult. You have commodity products often, and it's kind of a difficult thing. So it turns out that most companies want to have unfair advantages, and it's not like they're cheating, but if you think about it, it's like, well, if I'm in this marketplace and I have some secret thing that only I have, of course I'm going to use that, right? And so companies love that. They're like, like AOL. They leveraged network effects. They were number one in instant messaging for a really long time, and that was awesome for them. It's like it was very difficult for people to steal market share, and they could use that in other ways. Turns out I don't think they did enough with that, but they certainly had that asset, and they could have done a lot with it. Other kind of examples of unfair markets are sort of kind of constraint dynamics. If you think about it, like maybe there's natural resources, right? So if you're an oil producer somewhere and you have oil-rich rights, that could be a competitive advantage. There's sort of government, regulatory issues that can give you an unfair advantage. Access to customers, like if you have a distribution channel and it turns out you have control over what products get presented to customers, you can use that as an advantage. So you can use lots of different assets to create unfair advantages, and companies all the time are trying to do that, right? So the first thing they're trying to do is to create some unfair advantage, and they want to be able to do that, and they want to make sure that it's long-term, right? Because that's the way they can maximize profits. Makes sense, right? So that becomes very important. So these dynamics of how do you make the marketplace, kind of tilt the marketplace to your advantage, becomes a major strategy and a major source of energy for companies. And then all other things being equal, then it's sort of like, well, companies, they can compete on price, they can compete on value, they can be first with stuff, they often compete on scale, right? So if you do stuff at larger scale, that can be a competitive advantage, actually, and you can turn it into an unfair advantage. You can also be better, and I'll talk about that in a second. Better is a challenging word. Only leaders have the option to be fast followers, right? So if you have an unfair advantage, turns out your strategy is pretty easy. Unfair advantage, you're number one, you be a fast follower. That's what a lot of companies do, and they make a lot of money. Often I think unfair leaders. So if you have unfair advantage and you're the leader, you can also milk markets. You can also charge monopoly rents for things, and you can think about cable companies as an example potentially. It's like, hey, the government has only issued so many licenses for being in certain markets, and you don't really have a lot of competition. You can charge, your prices get regulated, but you have a lot of ability to make money, right? Those are kind of some fundamentals of kind of more mature markets. Okay, so there's not that many of them, but hopefully they make sense in terms of some of the dynamics and some of the strategies. So I want to talk a little bit about better. So if you think about it, for better to really matter, it really has to be kind of an order of magnitude better. You kind of hear this sort of as an aphorism in the technology world, and it's really, really true. So some examples. So like if you think about like Sony PlayStation 3 versus Xbox 360, is one better than the other? Yes? No? Same? But if you look at their marketing, they're saying, well, we have Blu-ray or we have Xbox Live, right? They want you to believe that something is really better than something else, right? So here's an example, I think, of very close competitors, and it's very difficult to get, there are some things that are maybe better. There's always this raging debate, who has better graphics, right? But it's nonsense. The thing that was really better in this marketplace was Nintendo Wii. So I think this is a really classic example. These guys are really, really smart. They basically said, we're going to change the dynamics a little bit. We're going to create a motion controller that allows us to go after new games, new customers, and it turned out to be a huge success. So the number one in the game console space is the Nintendo Wii, right? And it's not for everyone, but they're outselling these guys, and they make a lot more money than these guys, right? And so this is a product that I think is really an order of magnitude better than what these guys have. And you could say, well, the graphics performance, but it's not just about the graphics performance. It's about kind of the whole product experience and who they can address with the product. And so I think that's a really sort of classic example. But I think this is not very intuitive to us as kind of consumers. And the reason it's not is because most consumer packaged goods companies, we watch television, we read media, and they kind of confuse us. So I know you all are waiting because on June 6th, what's coming is the new Fusion ProGlide Razor. Okay, So, and the way they market this thing is that they want us to believe that this razor is really a lot better than previous razors, right? And so they spend all this advertising, and we see the advertising, and we think, well, this, maybe this is really better, and maybe I'll go buy the razor. But it turns out what they're doing here is they're just competing with themselves, right? So Gillette has most of the market share in the razor market, and they're just getting us to move to the next generation of product. They're saying it's better, and we think, better is better. I better get this thing. But they're not really competing with some other product. They're competing with the product they're basically end-of-lifing, right? So they say, well, every few years we're going to basically release some new, better razor technology, and we're going to get the market to upgrade, and they get the top of the market to upgrade first. They skim the profits off of those customers. So if you're the first in your block to buy the razors, you pay the most money for that, right? It's kind of cool to like, hey, I have the better razor, and they want you to believe that that this is really better, and it might actually be better, but it's not an order of magnitude better, right? So the CPG companies, they basically they train us as children to believe that, hey, products that are better really make a difference, but it's unclear really if this generation of product is that much better than the other generation of product, and if they were to compete side by side, how they would actually do. So when you think about in the technology world is a lot different, right? There's many new markets, and what wins in the technology world, companies tend to not compete as much with themselves because there tend to be newer markets, they're less mature, and they really are trying to compete on a product basis. The thing that really matters there is substantially better. So if you have an idea for a product, I urge you to think about how much better your idea is than the competition. That becomes very, very important. And don't deceive yourself, right? I mean, you can think, well, this is kind of cool, and it's good for me, and how I use it. But you want to ask your friends and your buddies, and you want to ask people who are going to be honest with you, is it really that much better? You really think so? So anyway, we're trained to be confused by CPG companies. So just be aware of that. So that was kind of a little bit on strategy. Want to go back to sort of marketing. Okay, so we're gonna shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of marketing at a general level. So who knows what marketing is? We probably haven't had to ever define it. It's kind of a funny word. So I went to Wikipedia and basically said, what does Wikipedia think? Well, so marketing is basically a process for figuring out what the market wants. What does the market want? How do you sell this stuff? How do you communicate to your customers? And how do you grow the business? And I actually think it's a pretty reasonable definition. There are these, the AMA basically says this, the American Marketing Association says, marketing is the activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. But marketing is, I think the Wikipedia definition is pretty good. It's a collection of things. There's usually marketing departments, and there are people in marketing departments like me and Connie that do some of these things. And what we're trying to do is really figure out what's going to be successful in the marketplace. Originally, the term marketing came from people going to market, right? So if you were marketing, you were going to go to the market and you're going to sell stuff and buy stuff, and you wanted to be successful at that. And so the marketing tactics that you employed in buying and selling became very, very important. So the other kind of way that people talk about marketing is through this marketing mix. Like if you're baking a cake, there's kind of 4 Ps. Some people have 5, some people have 7, but 4 is kind of classic, where there's kind of 4 things that really matter in marketing. What is the product? What is the price? Where are you selling it? How are you selling it? And how are you promoting it and communicating to people? So those are kind of all ways to talk about marketing. And I guess my question to you guys is, do you guys think marketing matters? Do you think it's material and it can really impact things? Does anyone not believe that? Okay. Which matters more? Is it technology or marketing matter? Depends? Okay. Okay, so we're going to do a little test. I went and I kind of pulled some random data. So there's 4 products that I picked. I picked the hats and caps market in the U.S., swimwear, bathrobes, and lingerie. All right. How big do you think the U.S. market is for hats and caps, between 0 and 15 billion? Any guess? Hats and caps. You got baseball caps, you got Little League, you got cowboy hats, fireman hats. I don't know. Any ideas? What do you think? Sorry? 4 billion? Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, you're an optimist. It's $500 million, okay? Turns out, and think about it, I mean, hats are pretty cheap to make, right? So I think that's good. You're only off by a factor of 8. How about swimwear? What is the market for swimwear? 4 billion. Okay. Who said that? Okay. Okay. All right. So swimwear turns out is 13 billion. Apparently, the market for swimwear has been growing. So between 2006 and 2008, this is actually 2008 data. The data is actually a little screwy, but between 2006 and 2008, the market grew by $300 million. Okay, so $300 million. Remember that. So that's the market for swimwear. Bathrobes, what do you think? More or less? 1, 2, or 3 in terms of position? 2? Okay. Turns out it's 3. Okay. Market for bathrobes is not very big. An interesting fact I learned was that 90% of people who buy bathrobes are women. Correct. So, and then lingerie, almost 10 billion. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of sort of some products and how big the markets are for those products. So what if I told you, like back in 2007, that I had this great idea. All right, I have this great idea. I have a company, and if you think about, there's bathrobes, and there's probably some other robes as well. So we're going to, there's like clergy robes, a handful of other robes. Maybe the whole market for robes is $125 million a year. Okay, but I have this idea that I'm going to sell $300 million worth of additional robes in the next 18 months. Would you believe me? This is the size of the swimwear growth in the swimwear market between 2006 and 2008. So it seems kind of ridiculous, right? Agreed? Yeah? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay. Can it be done? Seems like it's crazy. Joe, you're crazy. How do you do that? Well, is it marketing? Do I use marketing to do that? Do I have some sort of technology breakthrough? Is there some sort of robe technology that people haven't thought of? Right? maybe that's my crazy idea. Is it both? None? I'm just crazy. All right. So the product, $300 million. Ready? It's a Snuggie. Okay. So you could say, well, is this really a robe? Does anyone have a Snuggie? Okay. Awesome. So, and do you like your Snuggie? Did you buy it, or was it given to you as a gift? Okay. So, so you guys have all seen the Snuggie. You've heard of the Snuggie, right? It's kind of filtered into our consciousness. So the Snuggie, it's the blanket with sleeves, okay? But it turns out, what it is, it's a robe, right? And if you think about it, there are some people who are marketing people, and you know what? I really have this great idea. There are these things called robes, right? Market for robes, not so exciting. Not growing, bathrobes, pretty fixed. But I can take this product and I can like triple or quadruple my sales, right? How do I do that? Pure marketing, okay? So, and you could think of it as like, well, is this excellent marketing? It's probably not. It's not really high production value, but I think there are some really good concepts that we can learn from the Snuggie, right? So this is how they market their website. This is the website today. It's a blanket with sleeves. You buy one, you get one free, right? They mainly sell it on television and in national retail. They give you this free booklight if you get it. They give you all these use cases, right? It's like this becomes very important in terms of how they market this thing. Well, it's good for traveling, pub crawls. There was apparently, this is a true story, in New York City, people got together. This Snuggie fan group got together and said, we're going to go on a pub crawl and it's cold, and we're all going to wear Snuggies and we're going to go drinking. Okay, chilly office buildings, sporting events, right? And 3 great colors. The colors are great: royal blue, burgundy, and sage green, right? So these are colors. I mean, if you think about it, like you're being marketed to when they use those colors, right? It's like they want you. This is like, it's not just, there's something sort of special about these colors, right? So anyway, that's how they talk about it. So they sold more than $300 million in robes. And really, what was it that they were selling? So the product. So we're going to talk about the marketing mix for Snuggie. So the product really was what I think of as like warmth, comfort, but with utility, right? So the person that gave you that robe thinking, well, maybe you have blankets, maybe have a bathrobe, maybe don't, but it would be nice if I could give you something that you could be more comfortable with, right? So if you're the type of person that's cold, it's actually a really thoughtful thing that I could buy you a Snuggie, and because I want you to be warmer, right? If you think about it that way, like the product that you're selling is warmth and comfort. If you think about it that way, that kind of makes sense. Like, who doesn't want to be warmer and comfortable in situations that are kind of cold and uncomfortable, right? And not only that, but you can use your hands, right? So that actually is a pretty good product. And it's only $20, and you get 2 of them. And you can give one as a gift, right? So that's actually a much more compelling proposition, and that's why they sold so many more. They weren't just saying, hey, this is a funny-looking robe. they're selling something that is much more valuable than that. It's like, I want my friends, I want my family to be like warm and comfortable. And that's actually a really good product for $20. Another thing they did, they picked a great name, Snuggie. Okay? Turned out there were products before the Snuggie. There was the Slanket. Okay? And that's kind of a crazy name. It's like, who wants a Slanket? I gave you a Slanket. It's like, well, is that good? I don't know. There was this other product called the Freedom Blanket, right? And it's like, well, what is that? It's like Freedom Fries, right? So the name was really important. It's like, this name really kind of captures the essence of the product. The tagline of the product, the blanket with sleeves, right? Well, that's sort of true, but really I think the position, like how people think of this product and the reason they bought it, and they may not have actually made this conscious, but it's sort of the reason they're giving it to people is because they want to be warm anywhere, right? And they might have a bathrobe, but they're of course not going to wear the bathrobe to the office, right? Because the bathrobe is for certain things. But the Snuggie, because it was a new product, you didn't have one, you could use it. It was okay to use the Snuggie in different situations, right? So it was be warm anywhere was sort of the thing that I think got people to buy it. Okay, that was very important, and that's all marketing. This thing is really funny. It's one size fits all. Who's that really good for? Right? This is good for Snuggie. It's terrible for customers. But they mention it as a benefit. It's like, well, there's only one size. The good news is one size. Right? If you're short or if you're tall, it actually turns out to be really inconvenient. But they market this as a benefit, right? This sounds good, right? But it's actually not good. And then they have these kind of nice colors, right? These sort of warm colors. So that's the product. The price, you get one. The introductory price is one for $15, and they sold a bunch of those. And they said, well, to hit the next level of customers, we got to sell 2 for $20. And by the way, it's great as a gift. And that was a brilliant idea. It's like, well, of course, who wouldn't want to have their friends and family be warm? So gifting was a really key sales dynamic. How do they promote this thing? Well, you see all these pictures of couples kind of snuggling together. They both have their Snuggies on couches, and it's like that image of kind of warmth and comfort was very, very powerful. I mean, who doesn't want to be that comfortable, right? How they talked about it, they talked a lot about the utility, right? You can be warm and comfortable with you can use your hands, right? And that really kind of opened up the use cases for Snuggie. And it's like, well, I'm not going to take my bathrobe to work, but I might take this thing, right? And so I'll buy it. It's cheap. And the other thing about this product was there were all these like YouTube videos and like Jay Leno and a bunch of people like made fun of the Snuggie, but it actually turned out to be a really good thing because people were talking about it, right? So like there were these videos, and then the band Weezer, they sold an album and you got a free Snuggie, right? And it sounds kind of crazy, but all of this PR, was actually kind of fun, and people liked it, right? And so they promoted it in some clever ways, and they kind of recognized that, hey, this is kind of silly, but let's run with it, and it worked out really well. And in terms of how they sold this thing, so the placement, so they basically went straight to consumers via television, right? Shopping channel. People are, they're sitting at, they're not doing a lot, and they're thinking, well, $20, I get 2 of them, I give 1 to my spouse, I'll get 1 of these. I get 2 lights. And they also did sort of national retail and internet. So that's basically Snuggie, $300 million. Not too bad. So what can we learn from the Snuggie? The most important thing, I think, is what is your product? Why do people value it? They may not have valued robes so much because they thought of robes as a particular use case, right? It's like robes are for at home. It's kind of like my robe is like not too far off from my underwear, right? So I'm not going to take that outside, but a Snuggie I might. Who's going to buy your product? I think these guys understood their market for the product, right? It's like, well, people like to be warm and comfortable. We're going to sell to people, and we're going to do it in ways that we can access these customers. So basically, that was really important. What's the sales dynamic? So basically, they said, well, we're going to go direct to customers. It's cheap. We want to get these impulse purchases. And so the sales approach became really important for the success of this thing. And I guess the story of the Snuggie, I think, is really that we can't underestimate the importance of marketing as a function in terms of how that impacts product success in the marketplace. And a Snuggie is kind of a kitschy example, and it's not. I wouldn't hold it up as sort of like put it on a pedestal of excellent marketing. But there are some really elements that are kind of, while fun, are I think really clever, right? You have to admit, $300 million. Can't laugh at that. Okay. All right, so just to kind of wrap up the marketing section. So the other thing you hear about marketing, I guess, is like the best marketing is completely invisible to the consumer, right? So I think we're subject to marketing all the time in our lives. It's something crazy, like people are exposed to literally hundreds of marketing messages throughout their daily lives. Like you'll see something, and you'll be in a store and you're getting all these messages, and people are trying to tell you all these things about their products. But the best marketing is really invisible to the customer, right? And really the best thing that can happen with your product, if you're building a product, you want other people to recommend your product. That's really what you want to aim for in marketing. You really want to have a product that sells itself. But in order to do that, there's a lot of work actually to make that happen, right? You have to give it a name that's really kind of clear so people understand what it is. There's all kinds of great examples in the technology world of products that have these crazy names that don't make a lot of sense. You want to have something that's very simple so people understand it. They can look at it and they go, wow, I understand what that does, and I understand why I might want that, right? So it has to be very simple. The value is really apparent. It solves a real need in a really sort of unique way, and the customers can get at it, right? They know about it, they can buy it, they know where they can go get it. So there's a lot of work. You have to do all of those things from a marketing standpoint to actually make an invisible product. And if you think about it, like Google, I think is a great example. They spent very little on marketing their product, but lots of people love it and lots of people use it. And when someone says, hey, what search engine should I start using? People would say Google. That was a wonderful thing for those guys, right? And what they did was they built a great product. They did all of these things, and they got really a product that sells itself and had very, very high word of mouth. And the last thing is, I think, marketing is something that you experience. So when you buy something, next time you buy something, I want you to ask yourself a question. I just bought this thing. How do I feel about that? Was that a good experience? What was the sales? What in this whole process that I went through? How do I feel about that? Do I feel like I got ripped off? Do I feel like I just joined a club? Do I feel like I got something really special? Marketing is something that you experience. So if you think about like Body Shop, if you go to a body shop, there's a whole environment there in Body Shop that is really sort of built to sell you personal care products, right? And they do a wonderful job. There's all this incredible attention to detail to basically say, you know what, I really want to get this shampoo and put it on my hair, right? Pete's, I think, is a good example. If you like coffee, go to Pete's. It's like, well, those wood panels, all these kind of cool coffee mugs and treats to eat, and there's a really good experience. And so there's a lot of marketing that goes into Pete's. Stanford, right? You guys go to Stanford. How do you feel about Stanford? Right? You probably feel pretty good about it, right? Stanford's actually done a lot to kind of market itself to students and get them to feel like, hey, this is really special, right? A good car company, and people talk about BMW a lot. It's sort of a great example. I think that's true. But Volkswagen, I think, is sort of interesting because they have a very highly segmented product line, and their products are very different. So, like, go into like a Volkswagen dealership and look at the marketing materials, sit in a car, and it's like, what is this car about, right? So I think there's a lot that you can learn just by kind of observing, because there's all these people trying to market to you all the time about what is really good marketing. And if you remember that marketing is something you experience, I think that's a good way to sort of think about how you want to communicate to your users. So that's what I wanted to talk about sort of generally. So we talked about strategy, some kind of fundamentals, and we talked about some fundamentals of marketing and the value of marketing, sort of what are some of the elements there. And now I'm going to talk about how that applies to kind of mobile apps. Okay. So mobile app stores. So people have a smartphone? Yes? You'll have palm trees, right? So there's a lot going on there. And so basically, fundamentally, I think you have all these platform vendors. You have people like Palm, you have people like Apple and Google and BlackBerry. They're all using applications as a marketing vehicle. It's like, hey, you can buy these phones, you can do all this stuff with it. More apps is more use cases, and there's all these network effects that are associated with apps, right? So people want the platform with the most apps. That becomes very important and very difficult to compete with. There's all of these control points that are owned by platform vendors. So like the whole mobile apps ecosystem is actually very carefully crafted to do some very specific things. You can think about, like, if you think of the internet as kind of the open ocean, like you can go, if you go on the internet, you can do anything you want. You can go to like a different country, you can buy something in a different currency, you can try to sign up for anything. No one is telling you what you can't do. But app stores are a lot different, including Palms. It's kind of more like an aquarium. It's like, well, I go to the aquarium, I pay someone some money, and I end up with a nice experience, but, they pick the fish that I see, and, they kind of walk me through certain things. They're trying to tell me something. It's like, well, here I'm walking through the tropical fish, or here I'm walking through, like, the deep water fish. So it's a very crafted experience. There's a lot of control. And those control points are things like merchandising. Who controls the merchandising in the app world? Well, it turns out it's the platform vendor. Who controls distribution? Who controls fulfillment of those applications? Who actually sells the application? Who sets the policy? Can you do anything you want, or are you subject to rules? So these app stores are these actually very constrained marketplaces, and they're really crafted to serve the purposes of platform vendors. And they do a really good job in some ways. For consumers, they're fantastic, right? So they're really, really simple, right? There's an icon on the phone that you go and you can search and you can find stuff, and that turns out to be a great way to sell applications. The other thing that I think that they really did a great job of is that they're safe. So you guys all probably, I bet you all screwed up your parents' computers at some point. Is that a fair statement, right? And the reason you screwed it up is because you downloaded some software probably and you installed some software and maybe there was a virus or the computer became slow. And it used to be the case that installing software on PCs was kind of a scary activity. When I was at Yahoo, we did this research, sort of this ethnographic research. We went to people's homes and we asked them how do they feel about the internet. And a lot of consumers were really scared of the internet because they viewed their computers as these sort of unpredictable things, because their kids would go onto the computers and they would download software or music or something, and something wrong would happen with the computer would start to malfunction. And so while the internet was very valuable in some ways, it was also kind of something that was outside of their control. And the reason was because people started downloading software, viruses came with that, and it became sort of this unsafe thing. So installing software has not always been such an easy, simple thing. And I think the mobile phone space has really kind of reinvigorated the market for software. The web really kind of was the way that people got stuff, was through a browser. But now that's starting to change, and they're downloading software, and they're doing it like they've never done it before. And the reason is that these platform vendors have set up these really safe environments. So like we have the sandbox, and we have this very simple transaction mechanism, and that safety and simplicity really makes a difference. So we have these kind of clean, well-lit places for apps that are controlled very strongly by platform vendors. So if you think about, so we have these aquariums. Let's use the aquarium metaphor. So we got these great aquariums, right? The Monterey Bay Aquarium, and there's basically 4 types of apps in the fish tank. There's more than that, but I kind of simplified things down to basically 4 things. And if you think about it from a strategy standpoint, I'm asserting that these different classes of fish have different strategies. Okay, so they're in the fish tank and they're trying to accomplish different things. The first type of fish are these entertainment fish. So there's entertainment applications. There's the games, toys, kind of trifles, and fundamentally the dynamic that they're up against is sort of this creative dynamic where it's like a hits business. It's like movie studios, right? So like a movie studio will go along, they'll make a lot of movies, and occasionally, bam, they'll have a huge hit, and that's awesome. And then they'll make a bunch of bad movies, and then a couple of years later they'll make another hit, right? But they aren't sure when they make a movie if it's going to be successful or not, right? So the success of their business really depends on the creativity of the people making the software or the movie. And so the entertainment applications are sort of this creative treadmill. You have to find people that are really good at building these entertainment applications, and you kind of hope that they build an awesome application. But you can't predict it. It's really a function of human creativity. These markets have leadership advantages, right? Particularly if you have a franchise. So if you think about like EA, they have all these licenses to build movie games and other types of games. That becomes an advantage, and it's usually an advantage only to the leaders, because the leaders can pay the big bucks to to some licensee to license content to build games around. And so that's an important dynamic. So you have this creative treadmill, it's a hit business, and it's kind of subject to fads and many substitutes. So I could play a game, but I could also watch a video. So there's many ways that I can use my entertainment time. So that's kind of the dynamic of that first set of fish or apps. Second type is sort of what I'm calling service endpoints. So examples of that are Facebook, Dropbox, Yelp, OpenTable. You have these services that are not necessarily dedicated specifically to mobile, but mobile is kind of a distribution opportunity for that service. It's a way for those services to engage customers on mobile, right? And this is actually, I think, the most successful and most interesting type of fish. If you're going to be in these mobile app stores, you want to be here. You're going to be this type of fish. And it's the only one that I think is really long-term defensible. I think the other ones are very difficult to compete in. This next category is sort of utility or productivity. You have things like tip calculators or translators. Like this is another type of treadmill, but it's about product treadmill. So it's about utility and need versus creativity. And it also has leadership advantages. So if you can be number 1, that's okay, but most people aren't number 1. And then you have kind of other types of content. And the reason I broke this out, examples of children's book travel guides, the reason I broke this out is because there are a lot of the dynamics happening now in terms of like if I have a book in a store. Right now that's an application, but maybe I actually should make that as a book in a bookstore, an electronic bookstore. And so there's a lot of things here that are changing in this category. So I broke it out separately. It's very similar to this dynamic. You have this creative people, you're on a treadmill, you want to be a leader, particular franchises, but it's a little slower in terms of the turnover for these products, but it's also a very difficult thing to be, right? So those are at a macro level, the 4 different types of fish and the types of dynamics that they're up against. So how are the fish behaving? So what are they doing? So in the entertainment space, for most of the app catalogs, so we're into this war. So the land grab is kind of over, right? So if you're building a mobile game today, tough, really tough. There might be opportunity on newer platforms, but basically you're cranking out titles, you're pretty good at programming for this device, and maybe you're building a franchise. But it's, you're kind of a hardened veteran at this point if you're building entertainment titles for mobile. The service endpoints, what their goal is, they want to be everywhere. They want to be, ubiquitous on mobile platforms. They're looking at all the things. And really what their dynamics, their strategies are subject to what the broader thing that they're doing is. Right? So Facebook is about a social networking space, and maybe there's an IM service about IM. So those dynamics and their behavior are driven more by that than they are in the mobile app space. Utility productivity, the land grab is over on most platforms. The kind of leaders are kind of hunkered down and they're doing this fast following. So I have this great tip calculator. I'm kind of looking for, or does anyone come up with a better idea? If they do, I'm going to figure out how to bring it into mine. But I have good word of mouth. If I'm a leader, I'm not doing anything to that creative because the land grab is basically over there. And for this other content, again, I mentioned the platform dynamics are really changing around content types. And so, again, I think the land grab is primarily over, and it's not moving as quickly. So that's kind of how the fish are behaving. And if you are this fish, hopefully you're a creative genius, right? So if you're doing this, good luck. Service endpoints. This is the best space to be in for sure, right? Mobile is a huge opportunity. It's a great way to get customers, and this is the most fertile area to be in, I think. Utility, productivity, again. Now hopefully you're a product genius, not a creative genius. And again, if you're doing something that's better, go for 10x better. Do something that's really, really better, okay? And if you're doing other content, well, again, hopefully you're a creative genius. You want to build a franchise. If you're nimble, maybe there's going to be some changes here that you can take advantage of, but this is also very tough. So, makes sense, right? So those are kind of I think the fundamental different types. There's definitely other examples, but I think those are kind of the big categories. Those are the dynamics of the category. Those are how the people in those categories are basically behaving. So marketing. So the dynamics that you're kind of working with from a marketing standpoint is basically you have this very highly constrained environment that a platform provider has made for you. It's like, welcome to our store. We'll do the transactions. Here's our policy. You have to follow these rules. Do things our way, and then you can do it. Great. So it's basically a level playing field. It has leadership dynamics for sure. The platform owner can do things to stir things up, right? They could say, well, maybe we'll feature you, and that could be really significant for you, but you don't get to decide that, right? So that's a very important dynamic. But as an app developer, you do have leverage, right? So you can say, well, you know what? I'm going to go to a new platform, and so I can switch aquariums, or I can add another aquarium, right? If you have something unique as an app developer, you can say, you know what? I'm going to go to this other aquarium, maybe it's not so big, and I can say, I will, bring my application to your aquarium if you do this for me, right? And so app developers definitely have leverage, and they should use it. That's part of the game that we're all playing. And then if you're looking at different markets or different aquariums, you want to look, well, how many users are out there going to that aquarium? But you also want to look for the sort of ratio of devices per application. So I'll tell you what these are. Today, Apple has maybe 100 million devices, iPod, Touch, and iPhone. They have 200,000 applications. So there are 500 devices for every application. What's happening on Android right now is those guys have had a lot of success starting last fall. But a lot of people that are here are saying, you know what, we're going to go over here. And so that ratio, unfortunately for the Android developers, is actually not so great. There's about 200 devices out there per app. Palm, we're still kind of a new platform. We don't have that many users, and we're over 500. BlackBerry is probably actually higher than that again. So there, when you think about, if you're thinking about different platforms, you should not only look at the total size, but sort of, what's the competition like? What are the dynamics, right? So then I just want to talk about kind of shifting gears specifically to if you're going to like build an app and do something, you know, what are the types of things that you want to do really? So this is kind of an app marketing 101, kind of all in one slide. So there's a lot of content here, but let's kind of go through it. So the most important thing you can do is build a great product. You want a product that sells itself. So all the stuff that Jeremy talked about, from designing a great application, having a great feature set, having a useful feature set to customers, that becomes super important. That's kind of the fundamental, right? You must build a great product if you're going to be successful. This UVP stands for unique value proposition. So you want to have a clear, unique value proposition to your consumers. Consumers need to understand very clearly, if I get this thing, what is it going to do for me, and why is this thing unique? What's better about this thing than everything else that's similar to it? So if you can have a clear, unique value proposition, that's incredibly valuable. And a name often goes a great way to establish that. And I think Snuggie is a great example, right? So like, well, there are products that were like this, but Snuggie was the one that went after comfort and warmth. So you must basically do that. The other thing, when you think about marketing, all kind of outbound marketing activities, if you're going to buy advertising or if you're going to do direct mail or television or whatever, you want to measure all of your marketing. So you want to basically say, I spent $1 million, I touched this many customers, the customers did this, and you want to really make sure that the money that you're spending, if you're doing marketing, is worth it, because you can spend your money a million different ways when you market, and so you must test it. Okay. So marketing, it turns out, is actually very scientific. You can think of it as running a bunch of experiments to get customers to try your product. There's a whole bunch of things that people do in apps today that are kind of high impact, free or cheap stuff, and that basically says, all the social media stuff, people have Twitter accounts, Facebook, blogs, PR kind of falls in this category, and this is something that I think everyone should do, but it's subject to how much noise is in the marketplace, right? So if you are writing a Twitter application on iPhone, turns out there's a lot of Twitter applications, and now Twitter has a Twitter application as well for iPhone. So it's a very noisy space, and it's difficult to get a lot of attention. You want to do it because it's free, but you don't want to spend all your time doing that type of stuff. So it really depends on how much noise is out there in terms of the value of that activity. Again, you want a product that sells itself, so a lot of people have these light or free versions of applications today in many marketplaces, and so this is a very good idea. It obviously takes work to do, so people should think about it. But it turns out that it's very successful for lots of people. Again, in the theme of like what sells itself, there's lots of things you can do to get users to become advocates for you, right? So that's the best thing. You want users to tell other users, hey, you should use this thing. It's a good idea, but before you do this, you want to make sure that your product is really ready. So you want to make sure that your product is worth recommending. And how do you know that? Well, users will probably tell you. They'll probably say, I love your application, and it's better than anything else I had, and I told my friend. And if you start to hear a lot of that type of feedback, you're ready. And you want to put features in your products to help users tell other users about your products. There's a lot of stuff that you can do online in various communities. Again, this is subject to how crowded your marketplace is. So what is the dynamic marketplace? How many players are there? How noisy is it? There's a lot you can do to buy advertising. Again, because you're in this constrained box, though, that's kind of created for you by these platform vendors, it's limited. So you can buy ads. So most of the mobile advertising market in the U.S. is about apps selling other apps, right? It's kind of strange, but true. You can swap links to other applications. You can say, hey, you have a good application that does this. I have a completely complementary application. Let's put links in each other's applications, and that way users can discover apps. That's a great idea. It's free. Lots of people doing that. Lots of companies have these app URLs, so you can do that. So you want to make sure that that's available to you. And again, this is about, if you're going to spend money, is it worth your return? Is it worth for you to do it? So what is your return on investment? If you spend $100, are you making more than $100 by doing that? So that's about testing what you do. Another really important concept in marketing is life cycle marketing, rather. So if you think about it, a good example maybe is like Facebook, say. So you use Facebook, right? I don't know if you remember when you started using Facebook, but think back. One of the first things you did was you found more friends, right? So you signed up, you created a username and password, you got more friends, and then you started doing more stuff. You started sharing photos or adding events. So there are these things that you started to do first, and then you did and that was one set of activities. And then you did a second set of activities and a third set of activities, and those weren't necessarily the same things you did. Eventually, maybe you're playing games, right? Like maybe you weren't doing that at the beginning, but now maybe you're playing more games. So there are these. So you have a relationship with this product, Facebook, And over the course of that relationship, you're probably doing different activities. And Facebook, I guarantee, knows what they want you to do at every stage in the life cycle. They say, well, you know what, the most important thing is to connect you with probably 12 people that you're really friends with, and if you have 12 friends, you'll come back. So they probably have an early objective in their marketing, in their life cycle marketing, to make sure that customers have a critical mass of friends. Otherwise, it's not worth them coming back. Let's not try to do anything else first. Once they have enough friends, well, let's get them to use these other features that are kind of interesting, and then maybe we get them into games, they can buy credits, and we can start making money off of them. So the life cycle, the relationship that you have with the product is very important. And as you build products, you're building a product, it's like, well, you know all about it, but you need to kind of put yourself in the shoes of a customer, kind of experiencing that for the first time and think, well, this is the first thing that I would do, this is the second thing I would do, when am I going to do this more advanced feature? And you want to kind of put together a sequence of events that makes sense for customers to engage with your product. Another thing you must do is you must talk to users. So you can throw something out there, but if you aren't open to feedback, you're never going to make a better product. So the name of the game in technology is, I think these days, is about leveraging feedback effectively. So talk to users, hang out where they are, online or in person, listen and respond to them, right? And you want to do that so you can iterate and iterate quickly. And again, your goal probably, because of the dynamics of this marketplace, and in general because of competitive dynamics in marketplaces, is to really be number one, right? So you want to basically learn fast and get to number one. If you can become number one in your category, in your niche, or whatever it is, that is the most valuable position. You don't want to shoot for number two. You don't want to shoot for number three. You only want to shoot for number one. And when you shoot for number one, back to the very first point, you want to make sure that it really is number one. It's not number one isn't adding 100 users a week. It's really number one in terms of market share. Okay? So this is kind of a very standard set of activities that I think you see happening in the application marketplaces today. And I kind of have just recommended, like, well, you must do these things, right? These are good ideas. These are some things. This is how to think about it, right? So these are a set of marketing activities that I think make sense for a lot of applications. So I just want to leave you with some final thoughts here. So hopefully I didn't discourage you. There's some things that are hard about making apps today. It's not as easy as it used to be, right? I mean, people talk about this idea of land grab. Well, the land grab might be over, but it's still pretty early, right? There's lots of opportunity. Mobile, trust me, is going to be big, and it's only going to get bigger. A lot of these dynamics in the app marketplace are under a lot of pressure, frankly, right? So if you think about it, people have heard lots of different stories about how companies do things that people don't like or developers don't like, and that pressure is real. And these companies will respond to that pressure over time. And so even though there might be some things that are difficult today, these dynamics will probably change, just like they changed in the IM market. And if you think about it, within this system that people have designed are flaws in the system. And those flaws are going to be exposed, and change will happen. And then platform vendors, particularly ones that aren't the leaders, we're trying to figure out, like, well, how do we, there's some great things about the aquarium, but there's also some really great things about things like, the open internet and the ocean. And we want to get to a model where we have the benefits of sort of like the aquarium. It's safe, it's easy, but how can we do that in kind of a more open way to give developers and customers kind of more choice? And so there's lots of people that are thinking about this problem. And so I think all of those are kind of good news in terms of application developers. So I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about this type of stuff. That's how kind of I think about some of these issues in terms of strategy and marketing. Hopefully that's interesting to you, at least, as you think about building mobile applications. Okay. I put together a little bit of a syllabus if any of this is interesting to you, and one TV episode. So if you have like a weekend and any of this was interesting to you, I recommend that you read this one book. These guys, Al Rees and Jack Trout, they're basically advertising execs. They've written like 30 books, and they're basically all the same book. Their most famous book is a book on positioning, and that's really what they're known for. But this book, Marketing Warfare, I haven't read all 30 books. I've only read like 3, is the one I like the best because it talks a lot about marketing and how to think like marketing and also all these strategy issues. And it's a really fast read. They updated it a few years ago. You can read it like, in an afternoon practically. And I recommended it to a product manager once, and he said, you know what? I've been doing this product manager for a long time, and this book was very exciting to me because I felt like I've been playing this game, but I didn't know what the rules were. And this book, after reading this book, he felt like, I now understand what the rules are, and I can play the game better, right? So that was his recommendation, which I thought was high praise for that book. You guys watch Mad Men? Anyone? No? No? Okay, shoot. You guys aren't in the right demographic. The season 1 of Mad Men, the last episode is called The Wheel. Mad Men is about some advertising executives in the 1960s, and it's a great show. There is this one episode, I think, does a great job of capturing what great ad people do and what they think like. And so basically, this episode depicts how these advertising executives are pitching Kodak a concept of how to sell the Kodak carousel slide projector back in the 60s. I don't know if you've ever seen these things, but they're like, you put the slides in and they go around in a circle. And in the TV show, at least, the Kodak engineers were calling it, well, they were calling it the wheel. Like, they felt something was cool about the wheel, but they didn't know how to sell it to people. And there's one scene at the end of this episode, like in 3 minutes, that I think does a great job of sort of showing you, kind of like the Snuggie, how ad people and marketing people kind of think about how to talk about products and think about products. So if you do one thing, do that. And this clip is actually even on YouTube. And then in terms of other stuff, so if you if one day you think about going to business school, you'll read some of these books. Clay Christensen, I think, is a genius. He's at HBS, and I think his books, I think, have kind of, at least for me, are kind of the new classics. And he wrote this book back in 2004 called Seeing What's Next. And it's about, he wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, An Innovator's Solution. You may have heard about that. This is kind of, if you read this one book, you don't have to read the other 2 books. And it's, I think, a really brilliant book. Talks about strategy, how to predict technology marketplaces. So a great book. This book was recommended to me by a 12-year-old, Thinking Strategically. And it's, I think, a great book on sort of game dynamics and how to think strategically, and something that I've recommended to a lot of people that I think is good. These guys are some Yale professors. Michael Porter is a super classic HBS professor, kind of the godfather of corporate strategy. This is probably his most famous book. You'll read it if you go to business school. That's maybe when you should read it then. And then if you want to learn more about marketing, there's tons and tons of marketing books. Northwestern is probably known as the best marketing business school, and Philip Kotler taught for many, many years at Northwestern and has a book called Marketing Management that is kind of a good sort of thing to leaf through, just to kind of give you a sense of what are all the marketing disciplines and how to think about stuff. So if you're interested in these topics, there's tons of stuff to read, and this might be a good place to start on some stuff. Okay? That's it. So questions? Should we do the, okay? Questions, comments? Yes?
So when you have an app, should you develop it and perfect it before putting it on the market, or should you push something quick, see the feedback, and then try iterating really quick?
I am a big fan of iterating quickly. The reason is because people, particularly if you're small, you don't have dollars to do market research, right? You're not making soap, and you can't do focus groups, right? So it's like, well, how do you get feedback, right? And so the best thing to do is to give it to people, and they'll tell you. So I think that as soon as it's useful, I think you want to give it to people. And there's this concept floating around the internet called the minimal useful product, or I forget what it is, drawing a blank here. But basically, there's an idea that as soon as you have kind of this minimally functional product, you should give it to someone. If you think about cutting away all the extra features, the core of an idea can actually be pretty small, and the thing that you want feedback on doesn't have to be super complicated. So I think it's very important to get feedback as soon as it's useful. So that idea of thinking about your product deeply and saying, well, the most interesting thing, the most unique thing that's valuable to customers is X, and as soon as I've done X in the form that it can be used by people, then I think it's useful to give it to people. So it really depends on your product, but that's how I would think about it. Okay.
So you talked about bundling in terms of the AIM and
yes.
MSN. How effective is getting user interaction when you bundle it with the mobile app? Is it just as effective as the MSN thing, or do people go take for instance the weather
yep.
app on the iPhone, which comes standard?
Yep.
Well, do you think people are going to tend to go more towards weather.com type of things, where they're more outside? In real life, they tend to be more of authorities rather than just in the app world. Do you think those authorities that carries over?
I think bundling can be a very effective strategy. Fundamentally, people, they don't like to do stuff. They're kind of lazy. I mean, not in a bad way, but they kind of want to minimize the amount of energy they do about stuff. And it's actually kind of hard. It's well, if you think about it, it's well, I could go to the catalog or the store, and I could search for weather applications, and then I have to decide, well, there's 50 or 20 or applications, like which one and why, and the different ratings. It's actually a lot of work to select that stuff, right? So if someone has put something there for you automatically, it's like, well, it's easy for me to just check that out and see if it works, right? So, and I think and if it fulfills most of the things I need, then I won't go looking for something else, right? And if you think about it, most consumers, it's like, you know, if they don't give products a lot of thought, right? They're like, I'm going to this meeting and I want to check the weather. Bam, I got the information and I quit, right? And I don't use it again for 3 days, and I don't even think about it, right? So I think most people, they don't have time, or they don't have the interest, or they don't really want to look to find the best, you know, weather application. So if something is bundled, it can be very effective, no question. Yeah. And which is a little discouraging, right? If you can't be bundled, but you know, if you can be bundled, that's incredible, right? And actually, I don't know if you know, but Yahoo powers that data. So Yahoo and Apple basically did that application together. And so and there's a link. What Yahoo got out of that deal was if you look, there's a little Yahoo logo there. And it's actually surprising the number of people that click through to Yahoo Weather as a result of that. They get a lot of people that are doing that. So, anything else? Thoughts? Okay. Interesting, not interesting? Okay. All right. So Kai's going to talk a little bit about some research that we did with the Stanford Consulting folks.
For more, please